My presentation tonight is definitely about the solo nonstop record attempt at a circumnavigation, but I also begin with sort of how this dream began, because it has been a dream for some 30 years and it's taken a long time to get there. So I do tell a bit of that story, and then we go through the circumnavigation and then try to think a little bit about some lessons learned. Without further ado, I'd like to start with a quick video here. This is just kind of a montage of some videos done in the past. It's kind of fun.
The oceans are our last frontier. One man, one boat, sailing around the world, alone.
In November, I will be making a solo, non-stop, unassisted, round-the-world record attempt. This will no doubt be the greatest physical and mental challenge I have ever faced, and I would be lying if I said that the prospect of being alone on the great oceans of the world for 4 months was not an intimidating thought. It is. Think about how many times I have spirits are using me, Lord, your voice is calling. What heaven brought you and me cannot be forgotten. I have been around the world, looking for that woman. Thanks. That still gives me a little bit of a chill and a little bit of a tear, so I must have a little post-traumatic stress disorder, I think. I'd like to double back now for a moment and get into a little bit of how the dream was born and the history of the many boats that I've had that I've used to gain experience towards this goal. I've always had salt water in the veins, and I think that comes from my grandfather, Hans Rosendahl. He was one of my sailing mentors along with my dad. Hans sailed 7 times across the Atlantic, all navigated only by celestial, which is now pretty much a lost art. My other mentor was my father, Woody Harris. Woody grew up sailing in Greenwich, Connecticut, as I did, and was a fabulous junior sailor and then a great offshore sailor. So he was the one that got me started in the sport, and we did a ton of sailing together over the years. I traveled across the country with some friends of mine and ended up working on a fishing boat in Bristol Bay, Alaska. Just an amazing experience. This is where the dream was born. I found my love for the water, my love for adventure, for the physical side of it, but also the strategic and tactical side of gillnet fishing is very similar to offshore sailing. So this was really got me re-inspired, and for the next 7 summers, I went back out to Alaska and fished and started thinking about how I was going to sail around the world. This next boat, the Open 50, I kind of consciously tried to take my game up to the next level and get more serious about sailing longer distances and transatlantics. You can see this boat, 50 feet, all carbon, swing keel, twin rudders, huge sail plan, really a powerful boat, and meant to go around the world, and I fully intended to take this boat in the Velux Challenge around the world race. Leg 1 was initially meant to be Newport to Newport, but preview of coming attractions, it ended up being Newport to Cape Town. Well, there's nervous Joe. I know I forgot something. And I did, of course. And then this is a teary goodbye. Very, very sad. Away we go, off Castle Hill. It was a beautiful, crisp day, November 15th, 2015. Day I'll always remember. The last goodbye, and off into the sunset. I got going really fast for a really long time, over, between 15 and 20 knots for a solid day. And what happened was that propeller spinning so fast, all that electricity comes into a converter box, changing it from AC to DC power. That converter box ended up burning up. So it was kind of a weird thing. I was sitting at the nav table, and that converter box is under my seat, and my ass began to get very hot. And then my ass began to smoke and smell this horrible burning plasticky smell. And I pulled it out and was like, oh my God, electrical fire. There's nothing worse on a boat than electrical fire. So that's the panel that blew. Unfortunately, I did not have a spare on board, so I had to make the decision, the very difficult decision, to divert into Cape Town, South Africa. So I knew that the nonstop record attempt was by the boards, but I was bound and determined to complete it. So we're kind of fast forwarding here to, I think I was just south of Perth, Australia, which was the halfway point in the entire voyage. Another day comes up. It's really hard to capture the size of the seas, but you can see how gray it is all the time. That's just constant clouds and wind, and that's probably 15, 20 feet. Yeah.
You had 50 feet that night?
50 plus, yeah, yep. This was, yeah. So I felt like a boxer that had gone 15 rounds and was, really, was that Roberto Duran? No mas. So I was all done. I was angry, and I was depressed, lonely, depressed, suicidal, yeah. But we soldier on. So here we are, approaching Cape Horn. Yeah, it was really, Cape Horn is Mount Everest for an offshore sailor. So the tension and excitement was building. I really wanted to get right up close to the rock, but a huge gale blew through, and I wasn't able to get right up next to the rock. But I did get around, and I was kind of at wit's end. The boat was, I had a lot of stuff broken on the boat, and my spirit was a little broken. I was just tired. I was really tired. And I remember talking with Ken Campbell, my weather router, and you can see, this is Cape Horn right here. I was coming in, and I was going to try to go right past it. Well, this big gale blew in out of the northwest, and I had to go, this bank here, the depth of the sea goes from 13,000 feet to 300 feet right here on that shelf. So if you can picture, the wave action in there is way worse. So Ken Campbell said, dude, you are not going in there. And I said, okay, I'm with you. So got around the horn, kind of collected myself, went past the Falkland Islands, had an experience with a fleet of about 50 squid boats, which was kind of crazy. And then I got hit with 2 northerly gales right on the nose, 30 plus knots for probably 2.5 days. And the boat would go up and slam and up and slam. And, I didn't know if I was going to make it. I didn't know if the boat was going to make it. But after a while, up in the bow area on the starboard side, an area about 2 foot by 3 foot began to delaminate. So if you can picture, the hull is an inner layer of fiberglass, a layer of balsa core material, and an outer layer of fiberglass. So in that panel, the whole panel began to move, began to pulse. And there was a cut in the outer skin, and so as it pulsed, water was squirting into the boat. And I was about 800 miles offshore in the middle of the night when I discovered this, and I was pretty freaked out. So I knew that I had to pull in. And Punta del Este, Uruguay was the closest point. So that's where I headed for. It took me about 3.5, 4 days to get in. Luckily, the weather turned very benign. This is where we tied the knot, as we said. This is my outbound track, and this is my homebound track. I crossed over that exact point. So that was officially, the completion of a circumnavigation, but not crossing the equator twice and not completing the requirements of for the record. And this is just a quick recap of the last leg going from Uruguay around the Bulge of Brazil. And then on past the Caribbean, back home to Newport. So there it is. But as to the question of learning something, I thought this is a funny one. And I wonder who that man is. And I hope I'll never see him again. Well, lowest low was definitely in the Southern Ocean. It was cold. It was windy.
How cold? I mean,
probably 40s. Low 40s. And wet. That was the thing. The whole boat was like a cave. Because anytime I had no heat source. But I would boil water, and then it would just be steamy. Everything was wet. The sleeping bag was wet. Clothes are wet. And so it's really hard to get warm. I remember exercising just to get warm. Yeah, well, I do. I think it's kind of a spirit of adventure. I like being out in the elements, and I like being challenged, by the elements. And I did discover that out in Alaska, where we had some crazy weather, and I found I kind of liked it, And then I began getting into offshore sailing in earnest, and I remember going off with my dad on the first Bermuda race, crashing through the Gulf Stream and changing a jib up on the foredeck with the waves crashing over, and it was like, I like this, So there's an element of it's the same as mountaineering. You climb the mountain for the challenge to get to the top. It's the same inexplicable thing. I think the thing that's a little different about me is that I had this dream and, kept trying to get it done, but, life happens on your way, right? So business and family and kids and everything, and things didn't come to a confluence until now. But I'm really glad I got it done now while I still could get it done. Well, it's like engine parts. It's parts for the mast and the rigging, you just go through the whole boat and you make a list and you try to carry a spare for absolutely everything you can. It was really a bad omission on my part not to have carried that little circuit board. Well, the circuit board comes in a bigger box. The whole thing weighs about 20 pounds, and I have things like alternators and regulators, and I had a spare winch, and at a certain point you kind of go, the boat's sitting really low in her lines, and but it was just a bad choice. It was a bad choice. I should have carried it, and if I did a long voyage again, I'd carry every darn thing I could. I was very excited. I really wanted to do this, but real mixed feelings about leaving my family for so long, which at that point was going to be a 4-month trip. It turned into a 6-month trip.
By our count, we tried to do a little bit of research and figure out how many people have sailed around the world by themselves, leaving the 5 Great Capes to port, and we came up with about 136-ish. So that puts you in a very, very small group. How does that make you feel?
Humble and grateful, It's pretty amazing. It is a really small club. There's not that many lunatics out there. It's far fewer people that have gone into space or done that type of thing.
What was the most difficult part of the entire trip?
Definitely the Southern Ocean and the last 2 weeks prior to Cape Horn, where the pace of the low pressure systems is just, normally there'd be maybe a 3-day break, and then there's a 2-day break, and then there was 1-day break, and then there was no break. It's just blowing 40 all the time. You know? It's physically uncomfortable a lot of the time. It's a 40-foot lightweight boat that gets thrown around a lot. So, you know, you're constantly sort of banging yourself, and you're like a monkey with 3 points of contact moving around the boat. And food was mainly the dehydrated meals. I don't mind the stuff, but I think I'm done with it for a while. Sleep was a big thing. 4 hours per 24-hour period was a good day, but that's enough. But if you get less than that, things go downhill pretty quickly with fatigue. It affects your judgment, it affects your outlook.
What, now that you're back, what are you most looking forward to?
Oh, definitely spending time with my family. I miss Griffin and Emmett and Sophie and Kim very, very much. I couldn't have done it without your guys' support. I so appreciate it.